Hello, hello. I am Coach J, Mr. J, Practitioner J. You can call me anything you like, just don't call me late for dinner. But I'm going to stay on the course of corny jokes and say I always start my classes with a corny dad joke. And today's is this. The other day, my son told me, Papa, they said you sound like an owl. I said, who? But All right. If we can take two deep healing breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, preferably with your eyes closed, but however you feel safest. So, mm. Sometimes I do cookie or pizza breathing. So you breathe in that delicious cookie that you just made. But it's too hot to eat, so you have to cool it down. One of the good things about breath work is that it gives your heart more capacity to beat freely. Because when we feel stress in our lungs, it kind of closes up and our heart stresses out more because it doesn't feel like it can move. All right, today's class is basically a trauma 101. I'm going fundamental here, not really betrayal trauma, not this, not just basic trauma. Might get into a little bit of something else, but just really basic trauma. I'll start by saying the word trauma comes from the Greek word wound. Wounds are covered with scar tissue that's inflexible, numb, and doesn't grow. Trauma impacts on a person can be described precisely the same thing. Trauma, therefore, can perhaps be described as a psychological wound. So trauma is a wound, it's a psychological wound. It's important to differentiate between trauma and a traumatic event, the latter being the cause of the former. We often think of trauma as being what happened, but in all actuality, it's the internal consequences, the movement that's internal of what happened. So how it impacts us on a day to day, what that trauma meant to us, how we interpreted it, that traumatic event. Which is why you can take 10 people, they can all witness the same thing, and then there's a spectrum. Some are going to be homicidal, suicidal, you name it, and other people are going to be like, eh, all right. Traumatic events are often divided into two categories. The first of these is more obvious one, which is specific trauma. That could be anything overt, physical abuse, sexual abuse, betrayal, a car accident. Such events can inflict immediate trauma on an individual, which, if not addressed, will often manifest itself in various ways for the rest of our lives. The second type of a traumatic event is more subtle, which is more covert, and that's often called developmental trauma. So here, the traumatic event or events is a prolonged misattunement between, say, like a child and his or her caretakers. And that results in a pain with children. So basically, children have certain fundamental needs. And when these needs aren't met, as is quite often in modern day societies, years ago, I think life was a lot more simpler, hunter-gatherer days. You got up, you went and shot a deer, you skinned it, you ate it. I mean, we didn't have all these bizarre technologies and all the stress we do today. So trauma is a lot more prevalent now because I think life just offers far too much stress and sadly far too many opportunities for people to get hurt. Um, Anyways, developmental trauma, therefore, is most often what didn't happen more so than what did. So we have needs, they weren't met over a long term, we can cause trauma. Now, trauma is also how our body responds to an event. You may have heard that there's two distinguished traumas. People differentiate them into big T and small t. While I understand the intent behind the language, it's not a phrasing that I necessarily care for personally. There's nothing little about the little t trauma. Not only is developmental trauma more common, but its insidious nature makes the impacts on a person's life usually more harder to recognize. Many pathological behaviors, thought patterns, and tendencies, both at the individual and societal levels, are a result of pervasive developmental trauma and are common they're often so common today that we consider them normal. Um, for instance, somebody says I'm an anxious person, possibly, but that also could be a traumatic outcome or a result from trauma. But in today's society, the majority of people are anxious. It's normal. Um, it's critical not only understand what trauma is, but also to heal any pre-existing trauma, especially after betrayal trauma, D-Day, because betrayal trauma often wakes up the sleeping giant of unhealed developmental trauma, which is why a lot of times if I'm talking to a couple in a session, let's just say I'm talking to a male-female couple, and let's just say for this class, the male stepped out. I might hear the female say, I can't believe you did that to me. Do you think I'm that ugly? Or I can't believe you did that to me. Do you think I'm that unworthy? Or I can't believe you did that to me. Do you think I'm that unlovable? And what she's saying is she's manifesting, she's stating some unhealed developmental trauma. So a sleeping giant of trauma that was unhealed. Not in all cases, but in the majority of cases. So whether overt or developmental trauma is a spectrum, like I was just saying before. We're all on it somewhere. To the extent to which it affects us in our day-to-day lives can often be shocking. But the key to keep in mind is that all of these impacts are coping strategies that, when they're originally formed, were actually they worked for us. But now they're adaptations, they're maladaptations that are no longer effective. They don't work for us. I'm going to give you a very, very, very small example on an extremely small level. We all have, and when I work with clients, I actually give them a saboteur assessment. We all have saboteurs. Our saboteurs could be we're people pleasers, we're avoidance, we're whatever the case may be. And where we get some of these, you could say trauma responses, we get them in childhood. Let's just hypothetically speaking, say you have a raging alcoholic for a mother. Well, you've learned to avoid her is the best way to live. That way, she doesn't scream at you and send you to bed hungry, and she doesn't beat you, and she doesn't, ground you or whatever. You avoid her. It worked for you. Really, really worked for you. But then when you get to be an adult, you still have those tendencies where you avoid, and then that now hinders success in your adulthood. I'll give you another example. Let's just say the only time your mother ever paid attention to you was when you got A pluses on your report card. Well, you busted your butt to please your mother because you knew when you came home, or you did the dishes, or you cleaned the house because pleasing her really gave you good attention. Well, now you're an adult and all you want to do is please people. And that can now come back to sabotage as an adult. Over time, however, like I just said, these maladaptive tendencies do not serve us as they served us when we were younger. If we don't work to undress them, they sabotage us in the future. So when we say that someone has, quote, PTSD or CPTSD, it's actually their trauma adaptations that we're referring to. And these can be anything from intrusive memories, nightmares, flashbacks, avoidant behaviors, changes in mood, social interactions, you name it. These coping strategies control our behavior, and they become matters of survival. I say it all the time. There's no shame in my game, my trauma. There is not a time, there's not a day to this day, and it's been decades since my trauma. There's not a day where I don't go out to eat with my family. And if I'm not consciously mindful of this, I'm subconsciously mindful. Where are we sitting and what table? If somebody decides to come in, do I have an exit plan with my family? If somebody decides to come into the restaurant, that's unsafe. Somebody comes in with a gun, can I knock this table over and use it as a shield? I mean, the traumatic brain, I'm sorry to say, is forever changed. You look at the world completely different. You have a completely different worldview than pre-trauma. Now, that's not to say that you're forever going to be burdened with all these things, because I do believe you absolutely can manage your trauma, manage your triggers so they don't manage you, but they do become a part of you. And I hope that doesn't give you a blah feeling. Trauma disconnects us from who we are in the sense that coping strategies and adaptations are fundamentally the real us. And I think I've used this before a couple minutes ago when we say that, we might be an anxious person. Um, Possibly we get some of that environmentally from our parents. But that may not be our true self. Our true self might be that's the expression of trauma, anxiety, or that's a response to our trauma is anxiety. After a traumatic event, we often operate in what we call the semi-conscious trance state. Now, a lot of you know this as autopilot or default. How many times have you went somewhere or went to work or got home and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I barely remember driving. Did I stop at every stop sign and turn my signal on at every red light? Oftentimes that's how you explain right after trauma. It's like we are in autopilot mode, especially those for people that are experiencing betrayal trauma and you still have kids. You need to be in the fetal position and cry your eyes out. That you need to do that, but you have kids. You still got to get up and feed them and put them on the bus for school. So your brain goes on autopilot for this. Trauma disconnects us from the present moment in a number of ways. In day-to-day life, we tend to think that we're reacting to the present, but actually, no. Reality, we're responding to the past. When someone triggers us, we can be sure that our triggers, which are from the past, we're dealing with it. So really, when we're kind of living in a trauma life, if we don't really manage our triggers and our trauma, we're constantly living in the past. And that doesn't really open up the door to the future. Just as we can identify with trauma adaptations, such as they seem like, they are us, I have anxiety or I have this or I have that. We can also turn them and make them into the enemy. This can look like resisting emotions, behaviors that we consider bad, such as criticizing ourselves. A lot of that's a trauma response. It's being self-critical, blaming ourselves for certain things. But if we just simply acknowledge our past traumas, acknowledge that we have been traumatized, that's the beginning of healing. Just acknowledging it, accepting it. Then we can start addressing, no, I'm no longer going to self-criticize. I'm no longer going to blame, and then we can start the healing process. Trauma disconnects us from ourselves by splitting off, shutting down, and hyperactivating various parts of our minds and bodies. The healing journey is therefore one of returning to wholeness by reconnecting with ourselves. I always say this. Healing from trauma is not, dealing with stress and working on stress and understanding this and understanding that. In my opinion, healing from trauma is being comfortable again, embracing joy, being comfortable again, pursuing happiness, because that's kind of what trauma is loving who we are. Trauma healing is accepting the flaws and the falses and improving, don't get me wrong. So I like to reframe trauma work. How precisely this is achieved will vary from each person, from yoga to therapy to psychedelics. I mean, the list of modalities is long, and each person, unfortunately, because certain modalities are time consuming and some costly, that does put a struggle on people. And sometimes people, I don't want to say are traumatized from this, but it's very aggravating when you are acutely devastated and you try EMDR and it's ineffective. And then you try talk therapy and it's ineffective. And then you try tapping and it's ineffective. And then all of a sudden you try theater trauma and you're like, oh my God, this was good. But you would have never thought about that until you did it. And sometimes you can't think because you're in a state of trauma. So this can, same thing with money. A lot of people have trauma and are betrayed they can't afford therapy or counseling or anything like that. So that's unfortunate. There's struggles, but there's a lot out there that are free. From national hotlines, international hotlines, your churches. A lot of things are on a pay scale. So like, usually, if somebody charges $200 an hour, but they take your income into consideration, maybe it's $20 an hour. But regardless, these are all things you don't want to think about when you're traumatized. It's like, damn, oh, I'm sorry to swear. All I want to do is lay in my bed in a fetal position and just freaking cry buckets of tears. That's what I need right now. I don't want to have to investigate my options so that could be frustrating. Okay, I digress. See, I need to stay to my notes. I just want to end this class by sharing a technique that I often recommend my own clients. And that is to write down the lies that you ever believed. Now, this could be anything from I was a nuisance as a child to after D-Day, I believed I was unlovable, I was unworthy, I was ugly, you name it. And then what you want to do is start addressing them one by one. And this is a very important technique because I always say others give us pain, but we give ourselves suffering. And some of the greatest wars are fighting the lies that we believe. So if you do that technique, feel free to let me know how it worked for you. And that is my class for today. I hope you got something out of it.